Hello and welcome to CTO Life Line number 11. I'm co-host Daniel Walters. I'm joined by co-host Noah Cantor and also our guest, Kathryn Belcher.
Hello, hello.
I think it'd be really great if we put ourselves in the shoes of, let's put ourselves in the shoes of a new CTO, right? They've been in management before, they've been kind of frontline before, maybe they're in a new startup, but they're just kicking off. They're just stepping into this position and it's their first three-letter role. And subconsciously, possibly consciously, they're worried they're going to mess it up. What do they need to know kind of when they step into the role?
I want to challenge you on a couple of the assumptions in the premise. I don't think I was as worried as I should have been about whether I was going to mess it up. That realization came later. But when the CEO pulled me aside and said, "You're messing it up."
Okay.
Yeah.
Because maybe it's just me then.
Well, I came from the place where it's like what the thing I'd just done previously had been going great. And so that had been a senior tech leadership role. And so I thought, oh, it's all the same again. Play it back. Just run what you've been doing back. And that was a recipe for failure. I just didn't know it yet.
What was the lesson the CEO had to teach you that first time?
I don't think he felt he had the answers either. He could just see the effects of what was happening or what was not happening. But I just assumed a lot about the context being very similar. But I forgot about all the things that were different. The previous role that I had succeeded in, I didn't start succeeding in that role either. The role had grown with me over time. I'd started as employee number 1 and we'd grown it to a team of 70. I took everything that was happening at year 5 and went, okay, well, this is what's going to be happening at day 1 at the next organization. And the next organization had 200 people brought together out of 2 acquired companies. So I probably should have guessed that things may have been quite different. And there were employees, a whole bunch of them, who had 20 plus years experience working in either of the 2 acquired companies. So that's very different from a culture which starts as you as employee number 1 and grows with you versus 2 cultures, or maybe really 3 cultures because of the acquiring company as well coming together. It's where I learned to value context eventually.
Okay.
What's that thing now that you would tell or ask yourself on day 1 as CTO?
Context matters is probably the phrase I would start with. If you search my greatcto.me blog for the word context, I've tagged a lot of posts with that word because just saying the phrase context matters probably wouldn't have meant anything to me at the time. So I've spent a lot of time trying to describe that so that hopefully people coming to some part of that would connect with it and go, oh, okay, and maybe able to run with it better than I did in the first year of that CTO role.
Yeah. What would yours be, Noah?
I think I would actually say that this executive role is more like other executive roles than it is like previous engineering leads. What you're looking for to be successful as a CTO isn't the engineering skills that have gotten you to this point. What you need to learn how to do and what you need to focus on is your relationships with the other executives and making that work, particularly considering that you all have different specializations. You've got to figure out how to talk together, how to collaborate, how to work together. Because your focus is no longer purely on the engineering side of things, you've got to figure out how to look after people who can do that for you. You've got to create an environment where those people want to stay, and all the gaps that you have can be filled by people that you hire.
Mm.
And that would have completely changed the way I approach the role.
Mm.
I would have also said to my former self, ask more questions about what the role's responsible for, because I walked into a role that was advertised as CTO, but was basically a CTO and CIO responsibilities.
Mm.
And that was for a company across 8 countries already. So like the breadth of the role was just almost impossibly large.
Okay. But so Kathryn, someone stepping into their first executive role, right? They take the advice from Daniel, just essentially given to a first-time CTO. They've got a need to kind of really understand their role. They've got a need to work with other executives. They've got a need to focus on people. What would you tell them?
Don't take advice from other people. That's what I.
Okay.
I'm kidding. I'm very much kidding. My experience across the board with executives, with senior leaders in manufacturing, education, whatever industry. Why do you do what you do? Are you running towards doing that because you're supposed to? Or because you really deeply desire to do that? I would, gosh, this is any executive, this is any role, any human being. I'd schedule in downtime. I'd schedule in free time, time to be bored, to think, to reflect, to ask yourself wildly uncomfortable questions. And if you're not good at doing that, Daniel and Noah are good at doing that with you. I'd slow down and I'd really think about why I was doing what I was doing. So I think working with senior leaders, a lot of motivations come from other people's desires or from what they think they should be doing. I think that's really distinctively different than saying you're in the wrong field or you're in the wrong role. I think that the fear of that being true is greater than the percentage of people where it's actually true. I'd have hard conversations with myself before I stepped into that role and as I was stepping into that role.
So I worked with a senior IT executive a few years back now. He matched the description of what you're saying pretty much exactly.
Mm.
He had gotten to the position that he was in because he was supposed to do that. He was supposed to get promoted. He was supposed to take the next senior job. He was supposed to find the new job that would be the next set of responsibilities. And by the time we talked, he was miserable. And it wasn't until he sat down with somebody external, and it could have been me or it could have been anybody else who had asked him like good questions, that he realized that his success wasn't what he wanted. His success was all the things that he thought he should be doing: climbing the corporate ladder, getting the next job, working with a bigger team. He was deeply unhappy, and it turned out he would have preferred to be a software developer. So that's what he did once he realized.
I like what you said there, Kathryn, about making time for thinking, and that's been a theme that Noah and I have covered. And it's normally where I start with coachees if they're looking for a place to start, with the outcome of being in control of your own time. Because the second thing you said, which was you often feel like you're beholden to what others are expecting of you or what they assume the role is about, or all those sorts of things. And so people's time and activity and attention can fill up to all of those things, and they may not be in line with what actually being successful in the role is. I think those are good questions for a CTO, because when we meet them, I think a lot of the time they're very, very busy. Some of it's their fault and some of it is the whims of others, and they need to navigate both of those.
It's one of the challenges of starting to work with someone as a coach, right? Can you find the time in addition to all of the other things that you're trying to do this, because you're going to have to do this in order to reduce the work that you're doing and get more free time back. But if you can't prioritize doing the work with someone else to help you out, then you're going to end up just adding to the load and feeling more miserable and more unhappy.
Yeah, it's a fantastic challenge. I was writing down and pondering a ton of questions before our conversation today. And one of them was genuinely, for a CTO, who do they consider to be their customer? And let me maybe give you the context, because you were saying it's important here. Do you have that time to carve out? And so that had me thinking, is a CTO their own customer first? And if we don't have that thinking yet, does it serve us to adopt that thinking? But I guess you can start there, or you can start with who a CTO's customer is. But I am curious about both, if you don't mind.
Well, they say put your oxygen mask on first before helping others. And I've always thought that was quite apt. Making time for things and investing an appropriate amount of time on the things that matter is important. Yeah. So maybe you are the first customer.
I think there's always, or should always be, that perspective. I don't know how many times you guys have come across this, but as a parent, we're constantly encouraged by society to put our kids first, right? Always do what's best for them. And the number of parents that I've met, and a few times it's happened to me myself, where I've completely done that and lost myself and then ended up miserable and then unhappy to actually be a good parent. If you don't take care of yourself, if you don't look after yourself, if you don't do what you need, then your ability to do what other people need and be what the rest of the business or your employees or whatever else needs from you, it dries up really quickly. You end up burnt out, you end up unhappy, and then the people around you end up unhappy because you don't have time for them, you don't have the attention to give them. I would suggest, actually, regardless of the role you're doing, look after yourself first, because if you don't, you lose the ability to look after anybody else.
It's radically countercultural, and it's advice that I think we each hear, and I shouldn't speak for other people, but my brain hears it and I say, that's nice for you. That's a nice idea for somebody else. Of course you should do that. You should take care of yourself, but I don't need to, or I'm not going to, or I didn't move up the corporate ladder by taking care of myself first. I got this figured out. And from experience, that's a disaster. I don't take my own advice. That's a disaster. So who is the customer, or who are the customers for a CTO?
Assuming we look past kind of looking after yourself, and you've figured that out and you want to figure out what to do next, I think it depends a lot on the CTO. But in order to be successful, I think over the long term, the customer for the CTO is almost always the rest of the executive. Because what you're looking for is the ability to work as a team and deliver what the entire organization needs in order to be successful. And the representatives of the rest of the organization are your peers. They're your team. We get into this C-level position and we think of the people that we look after. We think of our customers and the people that we support as the people that the ranks that we came through. Mm-hmm. Right. We think of the most important bit is I need to make sure that my tech team has the support they need to be successful. But when everybody on the executive does that, they don't talk to each other. And so the business can't function. You end up with a bunch of little fiefdoms that you hope work together, but it doesn't happen.
Mm. That's precisely right. It's the realization that comes to CTOs eventually is I actually need the help and support of my peers that I'm working with to get things done, because some of the services you're delivering is helping serve them. In my roles, work really closely with the chief people officer and the CFO. I've just been writing about funding and budgeting and the importance of how that interrelates with creating software and IT services. The recommendation there is just like the closer the relationship you can have with the CFO and the more you can understand how their job works, the more you can find sort of win-win ways that improve their lives and which also will improve things for getting things done as a CTO. There's something I listen for when coaching CTOs. It's the phrase, I'm too busy for, or I don't have time for. Those are great indicators as well. And I think we touched on this topic with Dr. Danny in a previous episode. And there's a whole raft of activities that feel inaccessible or just you can't possibly take the risk of doing those because there's things in the present to be done. As CTOs, a lot of what we do is trying to cause positive effects over the long term. Doing the right things in the short term can sometimes be very difficult.
What do you find are the most common beliefs behind those statements?
You've got one now?
There's the one that I come across the most, the one that's shown up with the most CTOs I'm coaching, is that they have to be good at everything. They have to know how to work with their peers. They have to know how to do tech strategy. They have to know how to manage people. They have to know all the inner workings of the technology stack that they're working on, as well as the decisions that are being made on a day-to-day basis by their engineers. They've got this internalized pressure to be great at literally every aspect that a CTO is responsible for, without the consideration that a huge part of that role is hiring people to fill those gaps. And so before they've had that realization, before they've hired to fill the gaps, they don't have the time to do anything because they're so busy trying to do everything. Yeah. Daniel, what do you think?
I think it's definitely that. There's lots of struggles about letting go of the things that made them successful before when they were rising through the ranks. But there's also something about if I go and write out a plan, which is the step-by-step, then I've ended up with something concrete and something certain, and I can have done that by the end of the week. So I've got time for that. But maybe going in and getting the right people together and exploring and discovering about a particular problem, that feels like it takes time. And I don't even know if we walk out of that discussion 100% knowing what the problem was. And so the trade-off of those two things, like I can just go make a plan and that's concrete and we'll have a plan by the end of this session. I'll be able to look at it, it'll be there in black and white, versus I'm going to have a messy conversation exploring about what do our customers want and what's that challenge they got and all that sort of stuff. And we might come out with an answer, we may not. I can't afford to do that. I don't have time for it, you know.
You've reminded me of something that I think is actually really important and has parallels in manufacturing, which is busyness culture. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do the thing that I can get done. So I feel productive because I'm doing stuff. And as a frontline worker, a lot of the time being busy is being productive. But as you get promoted, that's less and less true because a lot more of your time is supposed to be spent thinking, considering what the future looks like, shaping policies and shaping the organization so that it can achieve those things. And if you're constantly doing those things, then you end up changing them on a regular basis. And the people that depend on them for stability, for safety, for security, lose those feelings. But knowing that is not the same as actually stopping being busy or wanting to be busy. And I grew up in the US. Kathryn, we've got the famous Protestant work ethic.
Yep.
Right? You expect to be busy all the time. And when you don't feel busy, when you're not doing stuff, you feel idle, you feel lazy, you feel like you're not delivering value. And especially as a first-time CTO, where hopefully you've had a significant raise stepping into an executive role, you want the company to get its money's worth. which means you want to feel productive. You want to deliver value all the time. And it's a really hard mental shift to realize that actually a lot of the value that you deliver is going to come through thought and being idle and letting other people deliver the value that you've envisaged.
No, you're creating nightmares with the truth here, my friend. It's beautiful. It's tangible, visible work. Less tangible, less known, less visible work. We can make it more visible. We can make what we're doing more explicit and intentional. We can create times. The advice I said, don't listen to advice earlier. Day one, you're a CTO. Every week, block 1 hour. Heck, let's call it I'm too busy for. Put it in your calendar 1 week, 1 hour, every week. I'm too busy for. Then every time you hear yourself say, now I'm too busy for that. I don't have time for that. You go revisit that in that time every week. Because I think human to human, anytime I say I'm too busy for I'm too busy for, what I'm really not saying to you is it's not a priority. Boy, that sounds uncomfortable. Nah, I don't think it'll be accepted. That sounds too risky. Don't want to do it. So when we have the time to sit with the truth, our own beliefs behind those statements, oh man, we learn so much about ourselves and our team. Yeah.
I recommend exactly the same. As I had it in my calendar. When I tell people this might be a good thing to try, for me it was a Sunday evening, and I had this statement which was, I'm too busy for equals I do not value. If I replaced one statement with the other and looked at the resulting sentence, did I still believe that? That was a really powerful, regular reflection point. Eventually, I took it out of the calendar because it just became habitual.
Yeah.
But it was a great way to start, to have some regular reflection that could challenge your current thinking.
Yeah. And maybe it's I do not value, or maybe it's I value the comfort of what is currently present than the risk and the discomfort of that. Who knows? There's a lot of things. And I think to do that work, and I speak from personal experience, also being aware of and practicing sort of mindful self-compassion in that work is invaluable. Because it's an easy, slippery slope to say, oh, I do not value. Oh, I'm not very good at this job. That's because I'm bad at this. That's because I can't handle this new CTO responsibility. Like, whoa. You say, I'm too busy for, because you're a human. And because rarely are we in such non-judgmental, safe spaces where we can call ourselves and each other out for, okay, come on, Noah. I heard you say I'm too busy for. What do you really mean?
No, that's all right. I was going to call out Daniel's. I did it on a Sunday evening. Don't do that. Like CTOs, you find yourself so busy that you can't take the time to do the stuff that's really important during work hours. So then you end up trying to take it home. That doesn't help with your ability to kind of think and keep on top of the job. It's an incredibly valuable thing that you suggested taking the time to do, Daniel and Kathryn. But I think find the time to do it during working hours. Give yourself the time at home with your family in that evening.
No, it wasn't a recommendation. It was just purely what I did. But fortunately, it only took 15 minutes. It's what works for you. It's interesting, whether you're there or not, your calendar will keep filling up as well. That would be true even over the weekend. So I would take a look Sunday night, because I would wake up Monday morning and be rushing to get a car to get to the office and all those sort of things. There was this little window of like, I'd just take a peek. And then really I'd ask those questions we talked about before and basically clear out swathes of time. Eventually I took on the practice of blocking time. That may have been another reason why the Sunday night routine started to go away, because once it'd been kicked off and it became a habit, it was just, these were things that I did, so blocking time and all that sort of thing, so that you had time for deep thought. Sometimes it was about the relationships of others. I've got a block of time there. I'm going to wander by and see if the CFO is up for it, or I'll book some time with the CFO and have a chat with them. it's a great starting point wherever you put it in the week.
In saying that, you made me think of a phrase I recently heard. In addition to parenting, I'm quite involved in alternative education worlds, probably for another conversation another day. But in that space, I heard it said never, which I don't like never. This means 100% of the time. Never do for a child that which they can do for themselves. Okay, I dislike this statement and I love it at the same time. And something that you were saying, Daniel, made me think of it and get curious about it for a CTO or, quite frankly, any other executive role. Could we say never do for our team that which they can do for themselves? And the way I got there was talking about our calendars and our meetings and wondering how many times are we in meetings that really our team could be facilitating and participating in. So never do for your team that which they can do themselves.
Well, there are some parallels, I think, between parenting and work, but I think this is one of the times where the parallel breaks down, because that expression, when you talk about parenting, never do for a child what they can do for themselves, but actually, I like being kind to my children. And so sometimes I'm going to do things for them that they can do for themselves. I'm not trying to build dependency, and I will make sure that they do those things on their own sometimes, but I don't feel bad about helping them out from time to time to make their lives easier or make their lives better, or just because I feel like it. But I do think it's probably more true in a work context than it is in a parenting context, because actually most of the time, as a manager at any level, if you do things for the team, then it undermines a lot of the autonomy that they have. The notion of doing something for your teams because you're kind and just helping them get it out of the way because they could do it, but maybe you just want to do it for them. So many organizations find that to then reduce the team's ability or willingness to do it themselves, because then look to you to do it the next time. So if you build a relationship with your teams based on trust and safety and kindness and compassion, then when you do something from time to time, it doesn't necessarily create that feeling. But if you're in a situation where they don't feel as safe as you would want them to, then every time you step in, you risk doing a lot more than you think. And you have all the unintended consequences that you then have to figure out and deal with.
I think it's a rich vein of life experience to draw from. I wrote a post which was called "Don't Do Anything You Don't Want to Repeat," and in brackets, advice for new parents, because it was the best advice that I found. But at the same time, I don't want to conflate parenting with leading people, because they are different, and you were not working with children, you were working with adults who fully realized human beings. So you can draw from the life experience, but don't think it's going to be exactly the same. Yeah, but you can draw from any life experiences and draw some insights. So that's the link to that post, and I'm pretty sure I make that disclaimer that I drew from that life experience, but I'm not directly applying it.
Some of it applies better the other way.
Mm-hmm.
We're often so used to raising our kids in particular ways. We've got this kind of parent-child voice and parent-child relationship because our children aren't mature. And we try and help people at work have adult-to-adult conversations that are more even. But my experience as a parent has actually been that if I have those relationships with my kids, everything is better. And so I think there are more parallels than we tend to think, but not if you think of children as little people that you have to control and force to do what you want. If you try and bring that attitude into work, you're going to get in a lot of trouble. But you can bring that kind of relationship of equals, exercising power with working with people. You can bring that home and do it with your children in a way that works really well.
Well said. Fantastic disclaimer, because I think that conventional assumption if there is an equation of more than and less than when we're talking about humans, which that more than and less than distinction can come up in parenting and schooling, at work, anywhere there is a implicit or explicit hierarchy. If that thinking is present, or when that thinking is present, I think we're doing ourselves and each other a giant disservice, and that's in parenting or in leadership. So I'm a huge proponent of not saying that an organization is like a family or ought to be like a family, because I think for many of us, family is a place where we're stuck with one another without choosing healthy ways forward. So it's not a comparison I like to make. That being said, I'm with you, Noah. There are a lot of ways when you're in a win-win, thriving human environment that you really do see one another as both a student and a teacher, sort of at any given moment, regardless of role or position in the organization. That thinking, when brought to a parenting context, is really powerful, humbling, uncomfortable, very uncomfortable, and very rewarding.
Yeah. I feel like it links back to the context theme that we talked about right at the start. So a lot of new CTOs busy themselves with decisions about how the team is going to work and things like that. I generally suggest for them to think about what context they have based on their position and what information that position affords them, and then to start thinking about what the gaps of that context might be for the team. So where do they have a responsibility to start bridging that information? And I actually find that you can be more effective in bridging context gaps than you can be from essentially meddling in how everyone is going to work and do their jobs. And it's an interesting, because it goes against what your instincts are when you're getting in there. Because if you were a team member before, you might, I'm involved in that conversation about how we do the stuff. But now I'm in a role that's elevated or has more authority or more access to information from other departments or other things. You could choose to actually share some of that information, and people can make their own choices about how they respond to it.
I just want to call out the use of the word instinct, which I both like and dislike. And I never saw this distinction until I read Marshall Rosenberg in talking about nonviolent communication, where he talks about, we talk about how we do things naturally. It doesn't come naturally to me. It's not instinctive. And he says, for him, it's really important to replace that word with habitual, because actually there is very little that we do, or significantly less than we think, that is something that we're born with. And in fact, we don't know entirely how much, but quite a lot of what we do is societally influenced. It's based on the experiences we have. So when you use instinctive because it's the response you have from having been in the team, I can easily see replacing that as, it's a habit that I developed in a particular context, and now I need a new habit. And making that distinction can sometimes make it easier for people to recognize, actually, this isn't how I always behave. It's not how I always have behaved. It's something that I picked up from working in these environments. And now I'm in a different environment, so I can do something different.
I wonder if our instincts were the habits of our previous forebears.
So given our discussion, a peer comes to me and says, okay, I saw you talking to these CTOs. By the way, what the heck is a CTO? How would you describe the role, the responsibility? And maybe I'm asking not for the minutia, but sort of like the big picture, what you see the role of a CTO as.
I've got a very kind of general description.
Yeah.
That's very short. It's pithy. The CTO is responsible for delivering what the company needs, value for the company, by the judicious use of technology or the judicious use of not using technology. The CTO is one of the only people in the organization who can decide whether a technology is the right solution to a problem. They're the only person with that context. And so that's the role, largely as I see it, is understanding when to step in and have your technology teams solve a problem with tech, and when to say that what will solve it, but we're not going to create liabilities. We're not going to create kind of weight that the company has to manage in the future in order to solve it.
Makes sense.
Daniel, what's...
I use the example of the role where I had the hats of CTO and CIO, which might sound like a small distinction. And in many companies of certain size, it may be just one and the same role. But really, those roles tend to speak to different audiences. So the CTO roles are focused on creating value normally for the company's customer base and the users or consumers of their services. And the CIO tends to be most focused on serving the employees of the company and meeting their technology needs. So that might be through the networks and the peripherals and managing knowledge and information and all those sorts of things. And so as companies get larger, those two domains get incredibly broad in their own right, particularly as companies like where technology pervades almost every aspect of every company. So that distinction might help in people understand what a CTO means as well.
Thank you.
I also think maybe that with technology pervading, it's sort of pulling the breadth of these roles almost impossibly broad, or at some point it's almost got to break, because if you've got to be involved in every aspect, then maybe the role is too broadly defined. If it's truly cross-cutting.
Well, this is something that occurred to me recently, and not for the first time. We encourage tech teams to be less focused on the tech and more cross-functional, right? To be part of product, talk to customers, have business awareness, support what they write, be able to write it, test it, do the end-to-end, and to distribute people from all those different areas into your cross-functional teams. And when it works well, the executive is the epitome of that. It is a cross-functional group that is responsible for delivering value. And when it doesn't work well, it is the epitome of that dysfunction, right? Everyone isolated, looking at their own things, kind of a myopic viewpoint. I'm just thinking, as it becomes broader and broader, how much of that technology responsibility ends up diffused and needing to be understood and acted on by the other executives? And then what's left in the pure technology space? What's that role end up looking like?
I mean, I've got views about how boardrooms might change over the next few decades, but it's the area which still tends to be quite functionally defined in terms of the roles around the boardroom. If you look closely enough, you'll see that there are shifts, that there's sort of relabeling of roles. And if you went to the detail of what the responsibilities were, those are shifting as well. So it's not quite as purely functional as it appears, but I think that'll continue to shift just because it will respond to need and forces.
I'm curious, Kathryn, with your focus in manufacturing education, do you see technology creeping in? What has your experience been like?
So I could have asked about a definition around CTO when we started, and maybe that would have been a wiser version of me. But when I say technology, I'm making the assumption that we're talking about digital technology, because all of my career I've worked in technology, but more socio-technical system. Technology is how we navigate, manage, understand something, right? It's a tool that we continually apply for some sort of expected outcome. So technology is very present in the work I do in lean and continuous improvement in education, in manufacturing. Digital technology is also present, though in my experience, it's used to support customers, often internal customers, in managing those operating systems, if you will, those continuous improvement structures. When I think of a CTO or really any executive role, and what I've had reinforced with your advice today, both of you, is relationship building, setting a direction, providing context, and then eliminating obstacles for the team. And whether that's your peer executive group or your team reporting through the organization, that is potentially a radically different role and responsibility than what you came from previously. I don't envy anyone listening. I have tremendous compassion for the role and responsibilities that you find yourself in. And I guess sort of the seed or the curiosity I have for everyone is, how do you do it? How do you make the shift from this is what worked really well for me in these previous roles, and holy cow, I need to look at all these preconceptions and assumptions that served me, examine them, choose different ones, and lead a team in a way that I'm just not used to. Thanks for taking on the task, I guess.
I think there are a number of possible answers to how you make that jump. And some do it well and some do it not as well. But I think we talked about this briefly in one of our sessions with Adelina, which is to do it well, you get help.
Yeah.
Whether it's from the other executives or whether it's from a mentor or whether it's from a coach. Like, we in engineering are often used to doing things on our own. You have a problem you want to solve, you go out to Google and you struggle with it and you figure it out on your own.
Yep.
But this is not a problem that you have to solve by yourself. It's not even a problem that you should try to solve by yourself. And the truth is, other executives are not trying to solve it by themselves. Like they're facing, it's not the same jump, but it is a similar jump when they step into those roles. And a lot of the time they have help. CEOs get mentored by other CEOs. They find peer groups that they can get mentoring from. You know, heads of manufacturing, they get help from other manufacturing leaders. They have peer groups, they have symposiums, they have connections that they develop with other people. They have coaches. The other executive all do this almost by default. And it's not universal. I'm not going to say every C-level executive except the technical ones have this, but a lot of them do.
Yep.
And so as a technical executive, you don't have to do it by yourself.
You made the point about you can get the help from peers. And that's where a lot of the help came from, in my experience. Sometimes it was just people telling me that I wasn't having the effect that I thought I would have. Brutally honest feedback like that.
Yeah.
But when I reflect back, all of that helped and helped lead me to discoveries. I just think it took longer than it could have if I had accepted more intentional forms of help, because I was offered coaching and other things.
I don't know what it is about engineering types, which I can say as a recovering engineer myself and married to an engineer. There's a problem is presented. For many of us, we have made a living off of being the person who can coordinate the solution or provide the solution. And it takes a nice mirror, some self-compassion, and some hard talks, I think, to realize that's not, in this case, what you've been tasked with. And the support is the way to do it, isn't it? Yeah.
There's something that came up for me actually just now, is you talk about kind of the help you get from peers. And the expectation from a lot of engineers is that they understand their domain that they're in. Mm-hmm. They get other people who understand their domain to provide them with help. And you get to the C-suite, and you're it. There's nobody else in your technical domain, nobody more senior. There are no technical peers that you can go to and ask for help. And I think a lot of there are two things that go into being willing to have the conversations that you need to have with your non-technical peers.
Yeah.
One of them is your job is not as technical as it used to be. You're about serving the business now. And the other one is you don't have to worry so much about appearing weak or incompetent in front of the other executives. Your job now is to solve problems the business has. And you can't do that if you don't ask them what they need.
Yeah.
And that transition, I think, is really difficult to make.
You know what else makes it really difficult is when you start, your other executive peers, it may be very comfortable for them for you to be away in the corner solving the technical things. And really, to get good outcomes, it's the collaboration with them. So it's not just you making that realization, it's helping them make that realization.
Good point.
That they can get value from collaborating with you. And because there's social friction between that, because that's not how they're wanting to prioritize their time at the beginning, it's often something that you don't make the effort to broach with them. But when you do, great things can happen.
It's a different type of problem solving, perhaps I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
So as opposed to offering this problem solving hand and solution, the help, I see it as you are in this senior tech role, is first asking for help. It's modeling. It's going first. It's doing the thing that is really socially risky and uncomfortable and unexpected. And I think that is the type of problem solving help that peers and your team are most likely looking for. They just may not know it. Yeah.
I also found that I was working on systems, but the systems that I was working on was the organization. That was the realization. Boy, there's a lot there. You've got the best questions, and I think you've proven it yet again. We can find you at LinkedIn at your name. So there it is on the screen.
I don't promise anything comfortable or the status quo, but if that's enticing, that is where you can find me. Mm-hmm.
What sort of things do you do with people, Kathryn?
Great question. People find me because I show up as a whole human who's quite confident, some say overly optimistic, that the way we create our systems can serve us. We create them, whether that's in business and manufacturing, whether it's in continuous improvement or in alternative education. We're the ones creating these systems. And so why don't they serve us all? When people find me, we can do one-on-one coaching together, or even I prefer experiments that are undefined and we create them together. This year, I'll be trying some new experiments in the form of in-person unconferences. So if you find yourself in an executive spot saying, I see the status quo, but I desire something else, a redefinition of business success. If you're in the continuous improvement space or in education reform, that might be the spot for you. So connect and we can chat more about it. Thank you.
It's been a really good conversation.
We're ready for it. All right. Well, we'll see you next year for CTO Lifeline. Thanks, everyone.